Welcome to Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Rose Minahan and guests unveil astrology's ancient archetypes that continually build the collective experiences in our unconsciousness. Get ready to find your free will from your roots in the stars.
Hello, again, this is October 17th. 2020, and we are speaking tonight about the United States natal Pluto return. And for those that might wonder what exactly that means, it means that Pluto has an orbit of about 247 years. Our nation, you might know, since July 4th, 1776, has been in existence since its declaration of independence that day, 244 years. So in 2022, Pluto will, in its orbit, make an exact connection, or it will aspect exactly the natal position of Pluto when this nation was born. That's one way of putting it. And those three dates will be February 19th, July 12th, and December 27th. It's a very slow movement. Our Pluto, because obviously 247 years, but Pluto is 27 degrees and 43 minutes of Capricorn. And at the time of the Sibley chart, which we use for the United States, one of the charts we might say for the United States chart, was at 5:10 p.m. in Philadelphia. That's July 4th, 1776. And it was retrograde. I was trying to put four ideas in there at once, but Pluto was retrograde. And so during that year of 2022, it will be initially direct in February, then retrograde in July, and then finally again direct on the 27th of December. Understanding Pluto is our terms of transformation, of empowerment, exchanging resources, and it exposes and reveals shadows that must be purged, because until we are able to purge and shed that skin, then we can have renewed life. Not an easy process. We're in the process now. We might wonder, what rebirth can we embrace? What will we surrender? And tonight, I have a wonderful guest, and I'm really delighted and pleased. He's new to Talk Cosmos, but hardly to astrology. Samuel F. Reynolds, a former skeptic, had a life-changing visit to an astrologer and has since spent 30 years doing charts and studying astrology. Sam is a traditional astrologer, consultant. He teaches webinar classes. He mentors. He's also a keynote speaker and lecturer at international conferences. He's an author of print and online outlets such as ebony.com, horoscope.com, tarot.com, New York Magazine, The Mountain Astrologer. Those are a few, only a few. And he's a board member, I should say a board of director member of various international organizations, the International Society for Astrological Research, wonderfully known as ISAR or ISAR, depending. And he is also on the Academy of Astrology, a co-founder of International Society of Black. Oh, you know what? I'm saying that wrong. So the point is, yes, he's a co-founder of International Society of Black Astrologers and a faculty member of International Academy of Astrology. His website is unlockastrology.com, and he resides in New Jersey. So I am most delighted to welcome Sam. Hi.
Hey, Sue. Thank you.
Yes. And what a big subject. I'm so glad that you suggested this. I've been looking at it from the lens of the moments. How are we marching? And now you're this talk is going to focus on this Pluto in Capricorn that has a lot to do about ethics for one, and I'm so delighted to hear what comes to your mind about this.
Well, I've been really thinking about the Pluto return for a long time, because it ties in, the key moment related to the American Revolution and what the American Revolution was about. And I think one of the things that we don't talk about with the American Revolution is its buildup, and its buildup specifically relation to the abuse of power on the part of the colonies. Recently I read Thomas Paine's Common Sense. I had read about Thomas Paine's Common Sense for a long time, but I decided to read it from cover to cover. And one of the things that was refreshing to read is how he systematically breaks down how we must look at power and who has power in our nation. And one of the things that will come up, I believe, as America goes toward its first Pluto return is the question of who has power in our country. And we think a lot about that in relation to, some of the usual talking points. Give it to the people rule, blah, blah, blah. But what does that really mean? I think Americans really are faced with. One particular arena where I've given a lot of attention related to power and Pluto is with the police and policing in America. And why I have focused so much on policing is because of the unrest, the discombobulation that has been experienced between the Black community in America and the police. Now, I do think it goes beyond that. I think it's important to kind of start there. But one of the things I've been talking about for years is that, and I'm not just like villainizing the police as much as I think there's been a certain abuse of power that's come through the police. And I think it's reflective of a deeper dimension that's happened in American life. And you might say, well, why are you focusing on that in relation to the police? Because one of the things when you study the American Revolution was looking at how soldiers were viewed by the American colonists at that time and the level of powers that they had. So let's talk about that briefly. Well, among the levels of powers that they had was search and seizure, right? They could just like literally stop you and be like, what's in your bag? Yeah, I don't believe you, right? And so it's that kind of particular issue. One other thing to kind of take note, I want to kind of mention a special note for your listeners, is that when you think about, it's said that the start of the American Revolution was March 5th, 1770. And there was a Black man who was killed that day in a confrontation between the colonists and soldiers. And his name is Crispus Attucks. What's significant astrologically, and this is sometime before, again, the start of the American Revolution, which, as you elucidated for your listeners, is July 4th, 1776. So on the day that Crispus Attucks was killed, Uranus, the planet that deals with revolution and change, was at 8 degrees of Taurus. And then we have 6 years later, we have where Pluto is at 27 degrees of Capricorn. Okay. Cut to May 25th, 2020, 2 months, 20 days, and 250 years after the death of Crispus Attucks, we have another Black man, George Floyd, who was unjustly killed. Now, what's significant is that Uranus was at exactly 8 degrees Taurus.
Yeah.
And then Jupiter, which represents how we have the experience of freedom and growth, was at 27 degrees of Capricorn, the same astrological position as Pluto was in 1776 on July 4th, and then, as you mentioned, in 3 dates in 2022, starting in February of 2022. So I think we're dealing with a critical moment in parallels of things happening in history that augur what I might say could be the extension of the American Revolution or the Second American Revolution. That's what I believe we are witnessing.
That's really, for astrology, a wonderful correlation of looking at the cycles. And, I mean, we know that life seems to remind us of things, but to pinpoint is real significance, because just Capricorn itself has everything to do about abuse, potentially the shadow side, abuse of power. And when you were speaking, Sam, I was thinking also, about was about boot camp. And I was thinking, because we know that abuse can be in these large institutions. It's just a process. It's like weeds in a garden. It happens. You gotta clear it out, and sometimes purge the whole thing. But
I'm sorry. Go on.
Yeah. I was just gonna follow up and just say that because in boot camp, you're so right about bringing up. I mean, there's a parallel. That's all with how during 1776 people would see the search and see. I'm trying to relate the exact words here. Search and seize. But in boot camp, people were allowed. And hey, I'm not in the military. I happen to be married to somebody that's a veteran, and I know that it's pretty brutal. It's like it's okay to just. Well, we're talking Vietnam, but and I really don't know if the boot camp, whoever does it, is different. But in other words, how we accept what we think is consciously fair, that belief system, going back to Jupiter, you've really hit a nugget here, because it's all integrated, and it gets to a point where we have to focus, put some light on it, just like Pluto, reveal it, to say this was the norm, but it's not just.
Right. And I think there's between what someone subjects themselves to by enlistment in military service, and then what civilians endure. And I think that's the key problem in American life right now, and has been in its past history. There's too much of a blurring between the militaristic sensibilities of public service and servants, and then what's happening among common citizens. So there's been enough written on the militarization of the police, for example.
Yes.
So I definitely believe we need, people to kind of keep law. So I'm not advocating for lawlessness.
No, I understand.
Right. But I think, we have to ask certain questions, like why do police officers need tanks when we have a military? Like, why do you need to have like all of these Humvees, in terms of public service? And then, a lot of people misunderstand the nature of when we say, or people say, defund the police. I think it's a reallocation of what services might be better suited in terms of dealing with particular issues. So, for instance, if there's a mental health crisis, you don't necessarily need police to come out who've been only trained, who get a training for 6 months and then have only had like a cursory training in mental health to come out and deal with someone who is brandishing a comb. I have actually, in New York, there's been a number of people who've been shot by the police who are pretty much, visibly brandishing a brush or a comb.
That happened here too in Seattle. A man that made totem poles was just carrying his little knife. It was a couple of years back. Yes, it's a lot of rashness. I think communication. I'm just thinking our natal Pluto is opposite Mercury. And of course, Mercury is pretty important now. It's ruling the North Node, but and I don't know how that goes with traditional astrology, but the fact is just by communicating, when you say ask questions and getting away from these cliche words, that's a huge part of my own thinking of how we can rebuild our
Well, I think, yeah, and you kind of alluded to it also earlier in terms of, institutions. I think one key way in which that happens is more localized control and then kind of embedding into the system, into systems, a responsiveness to the people. I'll give you an illustration. I'm pretty sure where you are out in Washington State, you have a sheriff. And chances are your county sheriff has been elected, right? So there's a responsiveness that comes from the people having a direct impact on their law enforcement. When it comes to police departments in urban areas, specifically in cities, police don't have to answer to quote unquote the people. The only people they need to answer to is usually the police chief who's been appointed by a mayor, right? It's not even a common council or, a legislative body within the city usually. It's more so directly by the executive branch. And I think there's a problem with that. And it goes all the way down to the beat cop, because the beat cop could be someone who knows nothing about the community in which he's emerged. And that's not just about like race. Like, I don't need to have, I live in downtown Newark, which it's kind of, it's a predominantly black city, but there are definitely obviously white people here as well. I don't need to see every cop be black, right? What I need is some cop who is at least familiar with the people who might be in the neighborhood and be able to, right, rather than be afraid of them because they come from someplace else and they don't know the people. And so they have their own conceptions, misconceptions, and stereotypes. So when we talk about different levels of power, I think I'm talking about it just in terms of policing and law enforcement, but it comes into other things. It comes into education. It comes into, how people feel a level of involvement in their government. One level that this operates on that we were just talking about is voting. So I think there should be a lot more of the feeling of participation and participatory elements of our government. So
there was a 2-year council of I don't know how many people. I just don't even remember. I'm sorry to say. It was on an earlier talk this summer. I discovered this, and it was their idea of how to I don't know even the word here, but to re-describe our government to make it really the promise quote that it is. And one of them was to make a day, it would be like a holiday. Everybody voted and it was a holiday, and it was required to vote. And personally, I know other countries, I think Mexico does this. I think that's a great idea, that it needs to be a expected participation. And in fact, I might add too, I would like to see it so that the news is totally absent until the next day. Nobody knows from one coast to the other coast how people are voting. You just plain vote. I just wanted to comment about the sheriff because I just got my ballot and I was so excited. But there's a couple of issues I was struggling about. But one of the issues we have is to change our elected sheriff to being appointed. That was so interesting. You brought that up. They said as of 1996, we made it elected. And I thought, well, maybe that's a good idea. It's not being appointed. So,
I think you should keep with that. I hope you do.
Yeah, I'm voting to keep it. I mean, elected.
Because, one of the hazards is that we've gotten so much away from the intimacy and the involvement of supervision of key elements of our life. So, for instance, there used to be boards of education, which means people were elected by their peers to supervise things that were happening to their children. Now we have a department in departments of education where people are appointed who may or may not be professionals, but we don't hear from people who are directly impacted by the decisions in their community. And they may have town halls or whatever, but in terms of key aspect of decision making, that's not coming from the people involved.
Being involved in politics is complex. I'm just thinking that it's a privilege, or it's a right. It's not a privilege. It's a right that we have to exercise, but yet it seems progressively. I'm not sure if the multitudes of people go to the caucuses and learn about all the law, because what you're talking about shows me the importance of understanding the ramifications of these laws. It's not just voting a person in, but like you say, it gets into the philosophy. I'm thinking of the South Node Sagittarius. I'm relating it to astrology here, and I'm also thinking that it's the belief system of changing it from a board to a department, and it's words like Gemini, the whole 9 yards. It's the definition, but it's subtle. It is important to understand, and that isn't something that is addressed much in our. I'm not sure how it's addressed.
And I think we will have to. I mean, one of the
Yes.
things that's interesting about something else that's coming up that relates to this 250-year cycle is that we're also going to experience a major shift on December 21st, where Jupiter and Saturn conjoin in Aquarius in an air sign. So we had a mutation of Jupiter and Saturn conjoined in air signs in 1981. But that was just a mutation in a cycle where we were predominantly dealing with the conjunctions, the great conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn every 20 years in Earth signs. So now we are having a powerful shift. And this traditionally, classically, was a marker of change in civilizations. When there was a change in the elemental nature of the conjunctions between Jupiter and Saturn every 20 years, which would happen after 240 years roughly, that signified even a change in civilizations. Now, I don't think this has to become a change or even a collapse, maybe that's the better word, related to our civilization. It can mean that since we're talking about an air sign, that we end up becoming more communicative, much more social, that we start to use the premises of social media as a way to aggregate discussion and meaning and involvement in terms of what happens with our society, rather than using it just to kind of prop up other people who decide things for us without consulting us. I'm not saying that we have to. I mean, I understand the idea of a representative government, a republic, but I think there are also ways in which we can have much more of a direct democracy in particular areas of our lives.
It's critical. I applaud your focus here, and I'm all about discussions, and it makes me realize that it's uncomfortable, inconvenient discussions sometimes, because the topics that need, it's one thing to inquire and find out and maybe debate, or not debate, sort of digest.
I think we can debate and digest too.
Yeah,
I think we've lost the art of debate.
Yeah, and it is a matter of how to ask questions and how to really keep juggling that whole conversation and expanding it, and be willing to make the changes when one realizes that belief systems or ideas were founded on the weak faulty premise. I mean, the theory is great, but what about the practice and theory? It's great we have a nation, yes, that people can immigrate to, supposedly once upon a time, and we have a nation that had all these ideals, and those are grounded and fine. But the reality is that equality is still a shifting standard. There isn't the real reality for economics and opportunity, and it can get adjusted. But it takes a lot of commitment, and I'm hoping, yeah.
Well, I think it takes commitment. I think it also takes an understanding and education related to some of these things. So many people think education is everyone getting the same thing. That equality is everyone getting the same thing, rather than seeing that equality is really getting what each person needs, right, in order to kind of be on par. So I love the image of, three kids trying to look over a fence. And it may be that, someone may think about ways in which they um, give another kid three boxes on which to stand in order to be able to look over the fence. But there's a better way to even perceive it. That equality becomes more so that we look to lower the fence so you don't have to make all these additional adjustments, right? So I think the key thing that we need to keep in mind is that we have a society that really is geared toward the preservation and the care for all our citizens, rather than like only the strong will survive.
Oh, yes, yes. This is a good point. I love, and mutability. Right now, we're in a very fluid energy system. It's the cardinal of Capricorn.
Yeah, it's very cardinal. Yeah.
Yeah, but we also have those nodes and Neptune that's kind of doing its shift. Well, this is October 17th with Samuel Reynolds, and we're talking about the Pluto return in 2022. So we'll be right back, and we'll be glad to dig a little deeper. Okay.
While we take a break from this week's edition of Talk Cosmos, let's take a look at this cycle's archetype. We are currently in the Yang period of Libra, ruled dually by Venus. By leaving the lower hemisphere of the self, the energy of Libra enters the arena where the completed self meets the other than self to form a relationship based on partnership. As a cardinal air sign on the descendant angle, represented by the equinox of equal light, Libra's energy learns through comparison and relationships, with the intention to integrate duality and polarities.
This is Sarah Stromley at Brain Body Therapy, and you're listening to Talk Cosmos on Alternative Talk, 1150 AM, where we unveil astrology's ancient archetypes that continually build on the collective experience.
Ready to shake things up? Try Alternative Talk 1150.
Hi again. This returning again with Sam Reynolds of New York and New Jersey. You can check Sam at unlockastrology.com. And we're talking about the Pluto return that will occur in 2022, 3 times, February, July, and December. And, Sam, maybe we can talk, because Pluto itself has everything to do about the right use of power, and so does Capricorn, which is exactly what you're really driving at. And whether we want to or not, these subjects, this whole, it's gonna erupt. It's what Pluto does. It wants to get rid of what doesn't work, what isn't giving life support through resources, and we have to figure it out. So getting the right tools, and your suggestion of looking at the education of systems such as our police force, that we give a lot of, how can I say, we as a society on the broad side, we trust, it's going to be this it'll solve things. Well, yes and no, it creates problems too. It's not So it's well to look at it, because and what I'm getting down with Capricorn is it's hard work and dedication, common sense, which maybe is one way we've got. The problem is that we're in this situation because, we can take the shadow side of anything, and it can be so disruptive, because if you look at the shadow side of Cancer, which is, it's opposite of Mercury in Cancer, it can be very self-protective and too self-protective, clannish, like just me and my close-knit group. What about them there, over there? And Capricorn can get stuck with, on its shadow side of looking at, the rules, and we have to get things built. It's for safety, but the compassion of people and lives. I mean, both signs have their great virtues. So I think that's what we've really got to bring in through all this. It won't happen. It's not happening overnight. So this is a good conversation to bring in.
Yeah, I mean, when I was talking about education, I mean more the citizenry. But in terms of systemic deep change, that's going to be incumbent upon not just deep reform, but reallocation of services, reallocation of monies, and then even in terms of who has power and how. I mean, one of the things that we have to give credit to with the American Revolution, even though there's a lot that was not done. So, for instance, it wasn't the liberation of Black people. It wasn't the redistribution of stolen lands from indigenous people. But one of the things that I could laud is that it wasn't just about replacing the king or saying, these are things that Thomas Paine talked about, going along with some measure of increased reform in terms of parliament. They're like, let's change the whole thing and we can have the power ourselves. And again, when I say this, I don't mean just in the romantic sense of giving power to the people. A people united can never be defeated. It's more so dealing with the idea of, I think, getting back to this sense of more an intimacy and intimate sense of connection between people and their government. That's what we're really talking about. When many people who are reformers and progressive talk about more localized government, even down to, how we have an intimate connection with district, I think that's what we need. I mean, America's not been the same since it's become much more of an urban country.
Yes.
And I think, one of the things that we're still struggling with, which our politics really shows, is that there is a powerful bifurcation between what happens in rural areas and what happens in urban areas.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think we need to really, as a country, also be aware of that. There are many people always are amazed, like, how did Trump win? Blah, 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 blah. Because a lot of people in rural areas felt forgotten, felt unheard, felt that they didn't matter. And then there are many people in certain parts of urban areas who felt similarly. So, one of the ways in which this has to be addressed, especially with all this amazing technology that we have, is how are we using it also to bring people together rather than forming more of our different packs. So.
Yes. I'm thinking, if people realize responsibility also, along with respect for every individual, very utopian idea here, kind of the whole Ho'oponopono idea, that we all have this responsibility for however has happened. And it goes along with respecting and listening to each person, regardless of whether they're homeless or whether they're of another any orientation, any racial, etc. You know, but you know, I'm just looking at this chart too to try to figure out. I'm looking at the first one, and it seems like on the
Let me see, which chart are you looking
the
at?
19th, July,
Okay.
not July, geez.
February.
Yeah, thank you. February, yes. I don't know where July came into it. Okay, that's the second one. Yeah, July, come on. February 19th at 5:22 p.m. Actually, in
Washington, D.C.
it should be. All of a sudden, I have Kailua Kona because I'm moving to Kailua Kona. So everything I did was Kailua Kona. Well, this is interesting. Okay, so but it would be same because it's a bi-wheel. So of course, it's all.
And this is February. Just repeat the date again, please.
February 19th, 2022, at 5:22:01. If you want to do the little tiny part of the second p.m.
And for Washington. Okay.
Well, no, yeah, it should be for Philadelphia.
Okay, yeah, we could do it for Philadelphia. I mean, I'm just thinking about the head of, because that Philadelphia was the head of government at one particular point. So that makes sense.
Yeah, that's always what I go from. I go from Philadelphia, but that's a thought too. But looking at this, regardless, and I put on the bi-wheel with our Sibley chart, July 4th, 1776, 5:10, just telling folks out there, PM Philadelphia. But amazingly, Venus transiting Venus and Mars are conjunct exactly at 19 degrees Capricorn and just 20 seconds, 20 minutes away from each other. So it's very, it's exact. And in Capricorn. So I don't know how, and of course that's opposing our sun. So it seems as our direction and our values, our money, you could look at it all kinds of ways, but I'm just hoping that there'll be a
Sue, we lost you.
Oh dear.
You were just saying you hope there will be a what?
Oh, through the turmoil of it, that there will be a connection between the desire of values and trying to get to, all the things that Venus represents in both signs, and it's, Taurus and Libra, with Mars of our direction. It's intense. It's going to be pretty intense.
Yes, I think. Yeah, I can hear you. I think it becomes. Yeah, Mercury is also conjoined to the South Node for that first return. I think it becomes, symbolically, and then also the Moon. The U.S. Moon is opposite to the Ascendant for that return, and I think there's going to be a moment of real strife that the American people may have with ourselves, and our sense of desire. I think that becomes a real challenge. I think that Venus, Mars in Capricorn has been a very challenging position for America. I won't say all the times it comes up, but at 9/11, Mars was in Capricorn, conjoined to the South Node. And then again in February, Mars was conjoined to the South Node, just as we were at the brink of dealing with the coronavirus. So to kind of deal with Venus, Mars, again, we were dealing with some measure of the marshaling of the will of the American people.
It will be. Yes, Sam, it makes me realize you're absolutely right. There's no fairy tales about this. It's really serious. It's somber. The moon, and I'm not trying to make doomsday. I'm thinking of people who are not just talking. All of a sudden I realize, oh my gosh. But the fact is, there is a moment of sobriety, of reality, of going, wow, we need to focus on this and kind of pull up the bootstraps and get together in the ditch and start working together, and not, rather than pointing fingers and the fears and all that. Because also there's the transiting moon is going to be conjunct Saturn. Of course, Saturn is going to be the name of the game in this guidance, one might say, and it wants to be fair. It wants to, in Libra, but yet it's going to have a lot of hopefully we'll be wanting to negotiate. We'll be realizing we need to. At least some people, can't rule all the people.
And when you said Saturn, you mean Saturn, the natal Saturn in Libra. I mean, one of the things that's also, beneficial is the trine between Saturn in Aquarius to the natal position for the U.S. chart, the Sibley chart, Saturn in Libra. I think that is cause for optimism, but I think, the good word that you use is sobriety. It is kind of dealing with, the American people really, soberly dealing with the legacy of its unresolved issues.
Absolutely.
And there were a lot of unresolved issues from the first American Revolution that we haven't really come clean about, whether we're talking about how we monitor, a population, also in terms of the unresolved issues from American enslavement, also the divestment of, I should say, just broad sale theft of indigenous lands.
Mm-hmm.
But now we have extra issues. What does it mean for how we're going to power the country? Is an issue of whether we're going to have clean sources of fuel, or how are we also going to deal with fossil fuel and the distribution of it. One of the things that the world is waking up to is also between climate change and water, in terms of who has water and has safe water, clean water. I'm in a city that has had a significant crisis related to water for the last 3 years. Some people, the city has been aggressive and progressive in coping with it, but it did have a water issue, in terms of who had safe, potable water.
Well,
So,
and
yeah, sorry.
No, please. What I guess I'm wanting to bring people's attention to as they listen to this or re-listen is that these subjects you're bringing up relate absolutely to Pluto and in Capricorn. So these are not just, this is one conversation, which yes, of course it is, but it is a matter of bringing focus to these ideas, because history is everything about Capricorn. By the time it gets to the 10th sign at the top of the horoscope, the development of the people and the cultures are now working on their structures of institutions and rules and that. And with Pluto, that's a transformational power, like you either have power or you don't have power. This is what it's all about. So I guess for the astrologers, it may be apparent, but for non-astrologers here too, it's critical. This is what the focus is. And so, and water, when you think of water, I was thinking, because Pluto is underground, and so we've been thinking that we had water underground, but I know in California, for instance, they're tapping that. It's pretty serious.
Well, yeah, Pluto is all things that relate to resources, right? In the sense that, and what we desire related, that comes from deep from within. One of the things that people often forget related to Pluto, and going back to the myth of Pluto, is that he was, yes, the god of the underworld, but he was also, by virtue of tapped into the underworld and where things come from. He was also the god of wealth. So, and how one had resources. This is why we even have the word plutocracy, right? In terms of who actually has power and who has wealth. So I think that's another thing that is a critical issue for the American people and public to work out is, where does the power come from? Who has it and why? And what are we doing with it?
Yes.
That relates to taxes, all these particular things that also were foundational for the American Revolution.
And I like the idea of ground up, like from the ground. In other words, close by. Gemini, right now, North Node Gemini, is the environment. And it reminds me that in Eastern Washington, because we here in Washington State have, the big city on one side of the mountains, and on the other side it's mostly farmland. I mean, it's a lot of rural, so it's pretty divided. But there was I read an article about a mayor, a woman, Asian woman actually, who transformed this little town that that I know about, Twisp, and and I won't remember the details and I won't say it, but she transformed by connecting to all the people, and it's pretty diverse. You've got your rancher farmers there, and then you have some artistic people, and then you have people from the New Age that have been there since the 70s. So it's quite diverse. But she's, despite the odds, rebuilt this little town.
Where is it?
Twisp, Washington. I wish I could remember more of the detail right. It is TWISP. You might Google that somehow. I can see you're active. This is good. Yeah, it was really a great article. I wish I could. I happened to live near there for a little while because I was part of a melodrama group way back in my 20s.
A melodrama group?
Oh, yeah, it was very exciting.
What's a melodrama group?
Well, it was Electric City Sideshow, and we did melodramas for the tourists.
Okay.
Yeah. So it didn't last too long, but it was educational.
I got you. Yeah, Twisp looks beautiful.
It was
looks
outside.
Very rustic.
Yeah, outside of the city, because that, and I think that's really a great way to begin too. We think of Uranus in Taurus now, which will be 7-year cycles. Still be for another 5 years, and it's about land, and authenticity. Getting, how I'm just thinking of how the different energies here in the cosmos are trying to get our attention, because for people living on the land and people living in the city, it's like that old story about the two mice, the country mouse and the city mouse, and they went to visit, which again, it's a Shaggy Dog story. But the point is, it's regardless of the times or the eras, we can divide ourselves in so many ways, and it's time to start connecting ourselves. Like Gemini, connect.
Right. Well, Gemini, I mean, you're mentioning the North Node in air, and here's what's interesting is that we're also going into this air era.
Yes.
With, Jupiter and Saturn.
800
and
years.
Saturn. Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's 800 years.
Well, there's 200 years. You said 240.
40 years, yeah.
But I have read that it's significant in 800 too, which I'll have to really research before I comment further. But
I gotta, maybe you know what it is. What it could be as it goes through the complete set, that might be the 800 years that it takes as long for it to get through the 4 elements and then to begin again.
Oh, I see. So in other words, it's maybe 240
times 4
part of, yes, because it is thank you. I'll have to I apologize, folks. Yes, if I'm, but I'll.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the complete cycle, and that definitely would be, augur related to whole civilizations. But 240 years was often perceived as a very long time, especially, classically. There wasn't, the fact that the United States has lasted this long as its own country itself, that's still like a powerful testament, because people say like, well, there's been the UK. Well, the UK, believe it or not, has also gone through its transformations. There was England, of course, from 1066, but then for that to expand in terms of including Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales and all. I mean, that's different in terms of the aggregation of the different nations that exist within a country to become a nation.
Yes.
One nation.
And Sam, you're absolutely correct. I just Googled it. It says there'll be a new cycle, Saturn and Pluto anyway, every 20 years. We, as you had mentioned, and we astrologers are aware that Jupiter and Saturn make the significant junction, but they cycle through the 4 elements over the course of 800 years. So thank you. You are right. Okay, yes, and with Europe is definitely a way to globally look at the realities of that. We're a big nation. The United States is so large.
Huge.
It is, and sometimes I think, my gosh. But I think too, rather than fear, which is a shadow side of Capricorn, which is really, we've got so much energy in Capricorn now, is to really understand, like you say, to dissect this. Okay, we have an issue. Things are not equal. Why? And there are good questions to ask, like who has the power and why? If we've given it away, or if we not accepted it, or if we not realized that we can change it incrementally from the grassroots and then go up and try to participation and understand each other more. Just get to know each other.
I agree.
Getting to know you.
Are you a singer too?
Oh yeah, I did a little bit of that.
Well, melodrama, yeah. You're an actor. I got it.
Well,
That's why you have such a great voice.
Yeah, for a little while I did this and that. So
Gemini.
yeah, I guess so. It was or maybe it's my Pluto and Leo. I don't know. Or maybe it's my Aquarius Jupiter in the 5th house. It's
okay. Well, you're coming up on a Jupiter return, so that's
I
also
am.
That's wonderful.
I'm really excited about this conjunction.
Mashallah.
My goodness.
Mashallah.
Yeah, break away.
Well, I mean, and then I guess one final note, because we're coming towards
yes,
I
noticed too. Thank you.
Yeah. For our international listeners, I mean, this has been a very American-centered, discussion, but I think, America has been cited as a world leader, as a superpower. And I think it's also a vital question of what is the real nature of our power, and how are we going to use it, not just in terms of our citizenry, but also in the world. Because, with these shifts related to Jupiter and Saturn, with these shifts also related to the nodes, and then also in terms of the Pluto return, it's a real question of what are we going to do about our power, because there's also the ascension of other countries that are stepping up related to their level of power. From China, Russia is back on the map again. And then there are other smaller, parts of it, in terms of even England is dealing with the question of its power and its currency and things like that. So we have a lot to contemplate individually, but then that also means how we're going to come together to discuss these things rationally, clearly, respectfully. And we're not doing too well with that right now.
No, we're not. And perhaps it takes a bit of a fall to pick up and like an addiction of anything, to really renew ourselves. But I love the idea of a kaleidoscope. I love the idea of many different colors shifting and turning, and the weaving and embroidery of many people and many voices. So I think there's potentially great promise, but it will take some work. We have a few moments here, and I will comment next week is Dr. Laura Tad with
All right, yay.
Planet Buzz, yes, from the East Coast too. So we're merging the coasts. And one of these days I'll be in Hawaii. But
Yeah, congratulations.
thank you. And I want to address that this has been with Samuel Reynolds of Unlock Astrology. He's involved in so many capacities here on a broad scale of the astrologers. And you know, with astrology, like our moon in Aquarius wants like-minded, and we want to improve. So we'll have hope yet.
Yes. Hope. Keep hope alive.
Yes. Well, it's just been a treat, and we'll look forward.
Thank you, Sue, for having me.
It's a pleasure. We'll invent more times. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for listening to Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Rose Minahan and guests unveil astrology's ancient archetypes that continually build the collective experiences in our unconsciousness. Be sure to tune in next Saturday at 6 p.m. to continue finding your roots in the stars.